Time to put the piston rings on. I did this once before with motorcycles, although these rings are just plain old bigger. Same deal, you put the oil squiggly thing on. I guess that's the oil seal. You put that on first, and then the 2 oil rings. Bruce said a good thing to do is to line up the gap on one oil ring with one of the edges where the bevel of the bottom of the piston meets up with the connecting rod, and then put the gap of the top oil seal ring all the way on the other side of the piston. It lines up with one of the other grooves. Now, as for the compression rings themselves, these came from Advanced Auto, and they're the regular iron piston rings. The bottom piston rings, or rather the secondary compression ring, is big, heavy, and it's iron, and that thing doesn't want to play with this tool nice. I'm like 2 millimeters out, just too. Ugh. So at one point, I just used my fingernail to dig underneath and pull it off, and then I bend my fingernail back. And then I go back to using the tool. Tool doesn't work. So I go over to the bench vise and just put the piston in there, and then with my fingers carefully move the secondary ring all the way down. And then that worked. That was easier than using the tool. As far as the top compression ring, well, the tool dealt with that fine. You just put it in the tool expands it, and then you place it on down. But for whatever reason, the second one doesn't. Now, this is Bruce measuring the clearances of, he said, do all the piston rings except for one, and then we'll use the rings to check the gap inside the cylinders. So what he does is he takes the piston ring, puts it inside the cylinder, uses the last piston to set it in square and true, and then he gets out his feeler gauges. Now, the gap for these are, it was 15 to 20 or 12 to 20. And these things are right on 20, so they're within spec. He says if we were racing this or doing some other things, he would want to get filed piston rings, which are made, extra. You have extra material. You put them in, and you ever so carefully file them down, so you get perfect within spec. But with these, what we're doing, we're just cruising. That's not going to matter. We're still within spec. We're fine. And of course, they expand and contract, right? As you're going to get hotter, the rings are going to expand. So it's nice to have just that little bit in case, for whatever reason, you start running hot a little bit, you're not going to seize up. There's going to be enough in there that nothing's going to happen. Behold, the palatial bathroom in Bruce Hen's garage, complete with urinal, small stall, and big stall, name brand toilet paper, unclogger, low sink, high sink. Nothing fancy here, just taking out valve guide seals. They got a new stand here for cylinder heads, so you don't have to wobble around on the table. Just 2 stands and spikes that fit in the bolt holes. Good to go. Here I'm cleaning up the push rods because they sat in oil. Those push rods haven't been touched since we took the motor apart. Again, grind wheel, grind all the gunk off, spray them off with brake cleaner. Moving on to the next thing. Hey, I'm not recording in the bathroom anymore. This is me polishing the little round Cheerios. Darn it. The little round, the what on earth are these things? The rotator thingies that fit in the roller tip rockers that we got from Speedway. They were a tad tight on top of the stud mounts, so what I had to do is, under Bruce's instruction, ever so slightly expand them using the little die grinder. This is me lubing up the crank and preparing it for the connecting rods. And this is me lubing up the connecting rod bearings. Bruce shows me how to insert one piston and also torque down the connecting rod bolts. This is how you insert pistons. Once you have your rings on and you align, or rather disalign, the ring gaps in a caddy corner pattern, in that a piston ring isn't one complete ring, it does have a gap for you to get it on. But once you have it on the piston, that gap cannot line up with any other gap. And there is a total of 5 things on a piston, at least 5 things on the piston for a Ford 302. Starting from the top, there's the first compression ring seal, then there is a second larger compression ring seal, then there is a very thin oil ring seal, and then sort of a mesh ring that goes around, and then a bottom oil ring seal. And every single one of those gaps cannot line up with each other, so that no oil blow-by can go by, or no compression can go by. Thanks to Mr. Hen, I was given a piston guide ring. It's ever so slightly tapered on the inside,
So as I slide the piston down into the block, it compresses the rings. I still need to tap it in with the handle of a mallet, but you don't really have to tap it that much. Oh yes, before you put it in, you must put rubber protectors on the open connecting rod bolts, so they don't scratch the interior of the cylinder at all. And here's all our pistons in, and I can put a wrench to the motor and look at that, they all go. Moving on, we have an interesting distributor from Speedway. This distributor is made for roller motors, which a 302 is, but it has the coil and the box. You know when you see those MSD ignition boxes? We've seen them forever on all sorts of classic cars. With this type of distributor, you no longer need that, and you don't need the coil. It's all combined into one unit. All you have to do is slide it into the block, set up a vacuum line for the vacuum advance, and there you go. There was a challenge, though. The distributor hold down was too small for the ring that fits on the bottom of this. So what you need to do is grind it out a little bit so it can make contact with the edge of the block and be able to hold down the distributor and hold it in place. Took a number of tries because we don't get to go back with this, but grind test it, and there, that's good. I know it looks like the distributor is at an angle right there, but it's really just fine. Now it's time to play the bolt game, setting up the oil pump and the oil sump. And up already, I dropped the bolt. Gotta go get the magnet on a stick, fish it back out of there. This is me putting the sump on. Bruce comes by to take a look, and me putting the oil pan down. You see, we already painted that. That's going to be the color of the entire engine. Ford blue. I have like 3 layers of paint on that oil pan. But I realized it's not fitting. It's not clearing the oil pump or the sump. It's hitting it. Bruce comes back and say, oh, put down the big oil pan gasket. That'll get you just a little bit more clearance. These gaskets we got from Advance Auto Parts. It's a hard time not saying it in past tense. Advance Auto Parts are adaptable either for a 289 or a 302. Since it's a 302, you punch out these little perforated areas so the bolts will fit. Now it's time to find more bolts. Remember how way back in the beginning, Bruce says, just put these bolts in the coffee cups. I know where they go. And sure enough, months later, he knows where they go. I gotta find timing cover bolts. But we run into a challenge. We have a different timing cover than we started with. Remember? The original timing cover did not have a hole for a mechanical fuel pump. This one does. Again, this is a 1968 timing cover fitting on a block from 93. Yeah, it does fit, and the bolts are all in the same places, and the bolt holes are all in the same places, but the thickness of the timing cover is different. In some places it's longer, in some places it's shorter. And drawers of bolts, lots of bolts. My life is bolts. I spent 2 days doing this, fishing for bolts. Oh yeah, you can see the distributor on the top of the engine. Bruce even had some special bolts that come directly from Ford. I only needed 2 of them though. Now with all the bolts in place, I can play with this eBay alternator bracket. Universal my ass. Yeah, it had all the pieces, but the QC on these no-name eBay brackets are that all the bolt holes are just slightly off. You can get 1 bolt in, and you can get another kind of in, but the third one will be off too much. So what I have to do is get the die grinder again with a little cone-shaped sander and elongate every hole. So I can get like 1 millimeter here, 2 millimeters there. I also need to take one of the cylinder heads and put it on because with this new alternator, comes a very long bolt that goes all the way back that goes into the cylinder head. That's the bolt on which our alternator will pivot. But we have another problem. One of Bruce's bolts is too long, just a little bit too long. So the way you cut a bolt down is this. Before you cut it, you put 2 nuts on it. What these nuts are going to do is going to chase the threads because the second I start hacking away at this thing, the hacksaw will wreck the threads and you'd never get it in. But if you have 2 bolts on already, the second you're done, you slowly back both of those bolts out and they'll recondition the threads as they back out and then stop. I made that mistake. I decided to clean up the end a little bit, but that wrecked the threads. So I had to gingerly put those bolts back on and get them to condition the threads. I was sweating bullets that I wrecked one of Bruce's $5 bolts there. But a little wiggling it went in, and then I could get my long bolt in, my adjusting rod, and there we go, our alternator's on. But oh wait, we have another problem. Again, that timing cover is a little bit too long. Plus, That timing cover is meant for a V-belt, and we're going to run a serpentine belt. That water pulley won't line up with the alternator pulley and won't line up with the crank pulley. Whew. They don't tell you about this. And at the end of the day, I go over to show Bruce, and I'm trying to just push this engine stand with the engine on it over top of an extension cord like I keep hitting, I can't get it over. And up walks Tony, and Tony says, "You know, you're doing this the hard way." Oh, okay. Thank you to Advance Auto for giving us all the little internals for our engine, and thank you to Speedway for giving us all the fun stuff. We'll have more explanations of how these parts work as we put them on and as we go from the mock-up build of the engine to the real build of the engine. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you're looking forward to part 7.